Welcome into Sports by Brooks on a Thursday from Los Angeles. I'm your host, Brooks Melchior. We do it live here on Fancred every single weekday. Full show for you today. We're going to be talking Packers, Eagles with Tony Bruno in Philadelphia. No better person to talk Packers and Eagles. Of course, fly, Eagles, fly. And we'll talk about the state of sports radio with Tony Bruno as well, who stepped away from sports radio as a number one host in Philadelphia. Of course, he's one of the sports radio OGs. Tony Bruno will join us here coming up in this hour. Also, we'll talk to Bart Winkler of Chuck and Winkler Morning Drive in Milwaukee, as we'll get some intel on the Packers. And also great timing today to have somebody from Milwaukee on the show, as the Brew Crew, Bob Uecker and company, Craig Counsell and company, minus Christian Yelich, make the playoffs. 19-4 so far this September. The Brewers are arguably the biggest story of the sports world today. So we'll talk to Bart Winkler coming up about that. And he's a morning drive host for 105.7 The Fan in Milwaukee. Immerse ourselves in Packers and Eagles. And, you know, I think it's a good thing because as I was watching ESPN this morning, I was flipping around. And it's typical ESPN. It's Pat Mahomes. Is he the greatest quarterback? Pat Mahomes. Is he better than this guy? Is he going to get paid? Or we're talking about Lamar Jackson, or we're talking about whatever we're talking about, everything but the actual game tonight, Packers and Eagles. And something tells me that if ESPN had tonight's game, if this was a Monday Night Football game, it would be wall to wall on that game. But in watching Get Up and watching First Take, First Take there, what are they leading with? What are they talking about primarily? They're talking about Baker Mayfield and Rex Ryan. Of course, Rex Ryan, ESPN personality, who said that Baker Mayfield was overrated over the weekend. Baker Mayfield shot back yesterday at Rex Ryan, calling him out for essentially not having a job in the NFL. Well, that's what leads. That's what we talk about on the worldwide leader, the media count of record, I guess you could say, in sports, ESPN. We get very little of what is one of the best Thursday night games of the year, Packers and Eagles, and there's a lot of storylines to it. But one storyline that doesn't apply to this game is must win. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But before I do, I want to also let you know we're going to be talking college football with Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated. He's a regular on the show. He's written a couple of interesting stories this week as we go into the weekend of college football. Not that many great matchups, to be honest. Not that many teams playing pivotal games. Ohio State may get a little bit of a test for Nebraska. Ohio State has had no test so far. But we'll talk to Ross Dellinger about some of the storylines going into Saturday. But more specifically, we're going to talk about what, to me, is the biggest story of college football right now, and that is what's happening at the University of Houston and what could set an interesting precedent in college football. D'Eriq King, the talented, dynamic star quarterback for the University of Houston, with the team off to a 1-3 start, King has decided that he is going to sit out the rest of the year, take a red shirt, maintain his eligibility. And the word is from King himself right now, he's going to return to the University of Houston next season for his final year before he is draft eligible. Eric King, who is the father of D'Eriq King, has said publicly that he wants his son to leave Houston, go somewhere else and play his final year. Think of like Jalen Hurts and what happened there at Alabama. Think about Kelly Bryant, what happened at Clemson after Bryant last season led Clemson to a 4-0 record. Then he was replaced by Trevor Lawrence. He now moves on to Missouri, and of course, he's the starting quarterback at Missouri now. Big win for the Tigers coming off a victory over South Carolina last week. Well, this could be a similar situation where D'Eriq King eventually transferred to Houston, and we start to see a pattern now. But in this particular case, it could be different in that Dana Holgorsen, the new coach coming in from West Virginia into the University of Houston, Holgorsen is telling people publicly, including Reese Davis of ESPN's College Game Day, that the plan here is for King to come back next year to get him another year in Holgerson's system and get him better prepared to play in that system so Houston has more success. And then I guess presumably the thought is that it's better for King himself and his potential draft status going into the NFL. But there's a lot of skeptics out there as to whether or not King is going to stick around. A lot of people looking at this situation, I don't think it's necessarily cynical. I think it's realistic in that Houston starts off 1-3. Anybody who's followed the career of Dana Holgerson closely, the Mike Leach acolyte from West Virginia, not surprised at what's happening at Houston. And I don't want to condemn Dana Holgerson just yet because recruiting hasn't necessarily started to kick in yet at UH. But I don't think it's a big shocker that Houston has stumbled out of the gate. They're 1-3 after that shocking loss to Tulane last Saturday. But a lot of people questioning this situation, saying that Holgerson should not be asking King necessarily or pushing him or suggesting to him that he sit out, because it appears that that might be the case here, in order to sandbag this season, tank the season. I mean, you think about how many times have you heard college football coaches talk about this and players? It's all about the seniors. It's all about the guys who put in the time and effort, and now this is their year. This is their time. Well, suddenly it's not. That doesn't apply, at least at Houston, at least as far as Dana Holgerson's career is concerned. I've heard a lot of people on Twitter, social media, in the media saying that D'Eriq King somehow is selfish. I don't know how you get that. I think it's the other way around. I think it's Dana Holgerson is selfish in holding up D'Eriq King at the University of Houston for perhaps another year because his team stinks. Holgerson wants to have a more of a veteran quarterback next year where the team might be better. And who does that benefit? Doesn't benefit the seniors this year, right? Doesn't benefit the season ticket holders. So it's a bizarre situation, strange situation. And I have a feeling that in the end, D'Eriq King is going to transfer. So who knows? This could be a spin from Holgerson to the national media. We don't know yet. I think the X factor, a wild card, could be the father of D'Eriq King, Eric King, before it's all over. We got a long rest of the season to go and an off season. So this could be a story to watch. But a guy who's been on the cutting edge of the story, essentially kind of broke the story, is Ross Dellinger. Of course, you know him from our show. He's been on, I think, almost every week since we started this show. And so he's going to come on, talk about this situation. He's got more insight into it probably than anybody on a national basis. And that'll be at the bottom of the hour. And then later we'll talk to, again, one of our guys, friends of the show, if you will, Robert Lital of blacksportsonline.com, BSO on Twitter. And he's boots on the ground for what is a big fight. If you're unaware, we've got Errol Spence Jr. taking on Sean Porter. Going to be a good fight on Fox Saturday night. Of course, we got college football. Got to figure that out. Not a huge weekend of college football. So it's broken well for PBC and Al Heyman, the guys that are putting this fight on. These are PBC fighters, premier boxing champions, this promotional organization that reps these fighters, puts these fights on. So it'll be Spence against Porter. Spence is your favorite. He is the more artful fighter. You can make the argument he's the more powerful fighter, more athletic, or maybe not. Sean Porter's a great athlete, but is he a great boxer? We're going to talk about that with Sean Porter. And tomorrow, we're going to have an extra special treat. We will have the number one boxing reporter on the planet, Mike Coppinger of The Athletic. He breaks all the news in the sport. He is the Adam Schefter, if you will, the Adrian Wojnarowski, if you will, of boxing. He's going to be with us tomorrow to give us the lowdown on this fight and everything else that's going on. And Oscar De La Hoya is really in the crosshairs of what's happening right now. If you haven't heard about it, his situation with Golden Boy Promotions, Canelo Alvarez, Ryan Garcia, and it looks like Oscar De La Hoya may be losing his grip on his own organization and his biggest fighters, especially Canelo. There's a disconnect there. And I'm going to ask a guy who knows more about it outside that organization, at least, than anybody, Mike Coppinger. What's wrong with Oscar De La Hoya? What's going on? If you haven't heard, there's a story there. I think there's a story there. So we'll touch on that. But again, pro football is the focus, as it is almost every day on this show, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And we hope to go out to Philadelphia and talk to Tony Bruno, who is a legend in sports radio, get a chance to visit with him about the Eagles and the Packers, old-time NFL rivalry, two of the original teams, legacy teams in the National Football League, and an intriguing game, to say the least, with the Packers having a chance to go 4-0. We still haven't seen that offense perhaps unleashed. Is that a credit to the defenses they're playing? Perhaps, but you've got a new coach in place, new offensive philosophy and system, and Matt LaFleur, a disciple of Sean McVay of the Los Angeles Rams. And it certainly appears that Aaron Rodgers is happy at what's happened. That may be a function of just how much he despised Mike McCarthy. Maybe it's that he likes Matt LaFleur. Maybe he's warming up to LaFleur. It could be a combination of all those things. I think we'll get some good insight from Bart Winkler from Milwaukee and 105.7 The Fan coming up. So, but we hope to get Tony Bruno on here in a second. I do want to talk about that Eagles game before we get out to our guests. And contemplate what I'm hearing from people publicly about that game. Because a lot of people are saying, and maybe it's just because they're trying to fill time, especially on television. A lot of people are talking about this as a must-win game for the Eagles, which is, I mean, that's all I see. And I know they're trying to promote it, propagandize it, get you interested in it, but you don't have to say that. I think this game stands for itself. You've got two good teams coming into the season. A lot of people thought that the Eagles were perhaps the best team in the NFC. You don't have to oversell this game. This is a great game. And now you've got the Packers, who are now the Packers again. And a defense that is, well, we'll see. And I think a great test for the Packers coming up will be against Carson Wentz and company tonight. We'll know a lot more about that defense, I think, as they face a better offense tonight. But so you've got a really intriguing situation. Aaron Rodgers has a chance to really break out tonight against a hobbled Eagles secondary, a hobbled Eagles offense, save Carson Wentz, who's trying to put the team on his back, and it hasn't worked out so far. So is this a must-win for the Eagles, though? I don't think so. It's still too early. 1-3 would suck. But remember, you got the Giants in the division, Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes, notwithstanding. You got the Redskins, and then you have the prospect of getting a Deshaun Jackson back. Doesn't look like he's necessarily going to be out that long, but he's a guy who will really add, when he comes back, of course, to the vertical game for the Eagles. You get him back. Alshon Jeffries continues to get more and more healthy. He'll be back tonight coming off the calf. But, you know, the fact remains with the Eagles, they don't have that transcendent skill player on offense. And because of that, that offense, in my opinion, needs to be better coordinated. It needs to be tighter. The execution needs to be better. And to that end, Carson Wentz has to work within that offense. And he's not doing it. We've seen him, the scrambling, trying to make plays, you know, a better version of Baker Mayfield, if you will, a guy who's giving up on plays, trying to do things that perhaps aren't meant to be with that offense. And I think that's been a recurring theme. Carson Wentz trying to do too much. He's got to settle in to the reality of that offense of the Eagles. Hey, it's great when Deshaun Jackson is there, but we're going to find out a lot about, I think, Carson Wentz tonight. Is he going to work within the confines of that offense of Doug Peterson? Is he going to believe in it, live with it, make the best of it? Or is he going to run around and inevitably, if you keep doing that, you're going to get hurt again? So now we're joined by a sports radio legend. It's an honor as we got to Philadelphia to talk to Tony Bruno Tony, how you doing?
Good, Brooks. Sorry about the temporary problem. My computer wasn't able to pull you up, and now I came over to Robin, my producer's computer, so now we're finally hooked up. Good to see you. Good to talk to you again, man.
Outstanding. You know, I'm watching all of the talking heads of sports media this morning on TV, Tony, and I know they're trying to sell the thing. I know it's a propagandizing thing, but everybody's talking about this as a must-win situation. And from my perspective, it's not. I mean, what are you thinking with the Eagles?
I don't think it's a must-win. Obviously, they'd like to win, and they obviously would like to come out and look like a professional football team. The biggest problem with this team, I heard you talking about Wentz. There's no doubt about that, but I think Wentz in the losses has played well. Remember, he's 0-2 on the road, so now he's on the road again. And all 3 games, they get off to slow starts. But this goes back to last year. The biggest problem to me right now, other than the wide receiver situation, is the fact that the Eagles can't run the football, and everybody knows it. They got Miles Sanders, the Penn State kid, on the second-round pick. They've been trying to force-feed him into this offense immediately. And when you're a team that has Super Bowl aspirations, and you went out and you got Jordan Howard from the Bears on a 1-year contract with no really intent to sign him long-term after this season, and you don't use Jordan Howard as your primary back, I think that's been the biggest problem. Howard, in his limited opportunities, is the kind of back that can pound the football and get you 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe even break. He's the kind of guy that doesn't need a hole to get some yards. If he has a hole, obviously he's much better. But we've been seeing Miles Sanders force-fed by Doug Peterson as a running back. He's done a great job out of the backfield catching passes. But as far as being the 3-down back, I don't think he's ready for that yet. I think he's got a good future, but if you want to be a good team and you want to take some pressure off Carson Wentz, you have to run the football. And the Packers defense, their only weakness has been giving up yards against the run. So if the Eagles can't come out and run the football against the Green Bay Packers with their limited offensive weapons, they do have, they still have one of the best tight ends in football in Zach Ertz. As you mentioned, Alshon Jeffrey's supposed to play tonight. And these other guys, the Arcega-Whitesides, have to step up. Another draft pick from out there in California who has been thrust into a role that he really hasn't had much work in doing in the weekly reps with Carson Wentz in preparation for these games.
It's almost as if then what you're saying is they're somewhat setting up Carson Wentz to fail. And when it looks like he's trying to do too much because they've abandoned the running game, or maybe they're not applying the running game the way they should, or the personnel at least, that's why you create that perception that Carson Wentz is trying to do too much.
Yeah, but when you watch Carson Wentz, and again, if Carson Wentz is playing poorly, I'm going to say he's playing poorly. So I'm not an apologist.
And he's had drops too, obviously, right? I'm leaving that out.
In fact, last week's game, the Eagles set a record, an NFL record, not a record. It's something that hasn't happened since 2015, and that's 5 years ago. But 19.4% of the passes that were thrown by Carson Wentz were dropped. So there were 8 drops in the game. 8 drops when and by the way, and they're still in a position to win a game on the road. So they were at home, obviously, against Detroit. So if you have an opportunity to win a game and you have major, major drops along the way, I mean, what are you supposed to do? Carson Wentz has been putting the ball where he needed to in those crucial 2 drives when they had a chance to at least tie it with a field goal or win it with a touchdown. And he had 2 crucial drops, including one on 4th down inside the 3-yard line, which Arcega-Whiteside dropped. He catches that ball, and they're first and goal at the 2-yard line with a chance to not just tie the game, but win the game against the Lions. So those are the kinds of plays, and we see it in all games. You don't make that one play, and they didn't make 8 of those plays. That's the difference between winning and losing. So to me, despite the running problems and everything else, you catch the football, you win the game. It's that simple.
Talking to sports radio legend Tony Bruno. You can find him at Tony Bruno Show on Twitter. Bruno Nation Live is a daily streaming show on twitch.tv. I want to ask you about that in a second in State of Sports Radio. But the last thing on the Eagles-Packers, I really don't see us. I mean, the Packers are now this ascendant team. Defense looks like it's much, much better. Hard to imagine the Eagles are going to get a win tonight.
It looks like that on paper when you break and crunch all the numbers, which we like to do. And I know I've seen some people say, the Eagles are a desperate team. I don't know if they're a desperate team, but obviously going on national TV, on Thursday Night Football in Green Bay, where the Packers have never lost a Thursday night game, and Aaron Rodgers can move around. So the Eagles pass rush with Fletcher Cox has also been a problem. Cox is not 100% coming off the surgery. So teams know that. They know that Fletcher Cox is not the Fletcher Cox we're going to see probably in a few games down the road. So he hasn't been able to put pressure. The Eagles only have 2 sacks in their first 3 games. So when you look at the numbers and you say Eagle defense not putting any pressure, and if Aaron Rodgers, gets out of the pocket and starts rolling around, he's going to find time to beat the Eagles secondary, which has been awful. And so those things, crunching the numbers, all look bad. I just have a feeling about it, not because I'm a homer, because I picked against the Eagles the first 3 games. So if I think the Eagles are going to win, can they win this game? Absolutely. But they've got to play a clean game. They can't drop the football. They can't, on 3rd down, not make plays. On 4th down, where this team has been one of the best in the league, they go for it on 4th down pretty much every time. So if they make those plays tonight, I think they'll be able to shut down the Packers' running game, and I think that they'll be able to get something going if they can run the football. Those are the things that they have to run the football, and they have to be able to rush the passer and make some defensive plays, things that they haven't done in the first 3 weeks of the season, despite winning a game and probably having a chance to be 3-0 if they had played well enough in those 3 games, despite the injuries.
I mean, I've got these questions here lined up for you, Tony, on the Packers Eagles, but you just answered them all. It's funny because, I'm watching ESPN. I mentioned this earlier in the show. I'm watching ESPN television this morning, all the different shows, and had this game been on ESPN, I think tonight they'd be talking about it, but instead they're manufacturing all this conflict stage stuff, and that dovetails into what I want to ask you about. We're talking to Tony Bruno, sports radio legend, the original article, an OG of the format, Bruno Nation Live on twitch.tv. But so you have stepped away from terrestrial radio and you went out on top. I believe it was in 2015, and you're doing your live streaming show now. I want to ask you about that in a second, but why did you decide to step away from terrestrial radio, especially considering you were still on top?
Well, you want to go out on top, and it wasn't I hate radio. I hate terrestrial radio. I mean, I've done it for 50 years, at every level, from the local level to the state level to the national level for many years at Fox and ESPN. So I've had a pretty decent career, and I'm 66 now, and I don't want to shut it down completely. And so the only way you can control your own destiny in this business, in a world where micromanaging is big, where program directors, with all due respect, don't have the power that they used to. The radio stations are pretty much run at the corporate level, and it's not that I can't listen to bosses who don't want to take instruction. I just don't want to work in a place where they hire you to do what you do, and then you go there and they say, well, we used to like what you do, but now we want you to do something else. And so I believe after all the years of doing what I've done successfully, I prefer to do my own thing now. And with the event, and I'm also one of those older guys who embraces social media, who embraces digital radio and what the future of this business is. Terrestrial radio is never going away, Brooks. But the bottom line is people now are getting their information, whether it's on television, whether it's on demand TV, anything you want, your show, people can get what they want now if they find it. And that's the biggest thing for me now, is getting people, because, I talk to somebody over 40, I say, yeah, I'm on twitch.tv now. And they say, what? And then I talk to people and Twitch, oh my God, I love Twitch. So that,
right.
That's the biggest hurdle we face. Those of us delving into the digital realm, knowing that that's the future of how people get their information or their entertainment these days. And so that's what I've been doing. And I still have fun every day. That's the bottom line. You know what I've done. I am a guy who relies on loving what I do, having fun with the audience, engaging the audience. That's what Twitch allows. And, it's instant reaction. When I'm doing the show, all of my followers, they chime along. If I say something they don't like, they respond instantly. So it's instant communication. And it's like your audience becomes your family because you're reading their comments and you're not relying on a phone. We do take some phone calls, but it's instantaneous reaction. And they feel like they're a part of the family. And that, to me, that's what I believe the future of this business is. We have text boards and messages and phone lines and all these other ways, Twitter, social media, as you mentioned. But the bottom line is the audience wants to feel like they're a part of your show. And I think the digital realm is really the best way to do it right now.
It's unbelievable. This is like in a real world case study this morning. All right. So I'm doing Eagles, Packers. I'm going to have you on. I'm going to have Bart Winkler on in Milwaukee. And so I'm actually going on the radio.com app. I'm on the iHeartRadio app, and I'm listening to local shows. And now I've got ESPN Get Up. I'm watching FS1 and all this stuff. And I'm watching and listening to commercials probably 75% of the time. And then I want to know, what do they think in Philadelphia on sports radio about the Eagles and the Packers? And this isn't about assassinating those guys, But half the time you're getting the entertainment, you're getting the schmooze, you're getting the personality, you're getting the idiosyncratic element of the show. And by the time you get to Eagles Packers, it's like 1.5%. And I've suffered through these commercials, right? Now I think about what you just did when we talked about Eagles Packers, and we're not doing commercials. And I'm looking at comments and we're interacting, and they can see you and they can see the personalities that they always wondered when they were on radio before they never saw. I'm like, Jesus H, this is the future. It should be if it isn't.
And I get a lot of people in the business who follow me, and obviously I follow a lot of people because my show every day is 3 hours uninterrupted. That's
right.
180 minutes of content. And the other thing is, now with the digital world, you can see how many people are listening, how long they've listened, and all the other metrics that radio stations need to go out and sell sponsorships. And the advantage that I have, I'm subscriber based. The subscriptions aren't expensive. I always say, you can buy for a month's worth of quality product, you pay $5. You can't even get a cheap beer for $5 now. So it's a subscription model. Am I going to make millions of dollars off of this? I don't think so. As long as I'm happy and I'm having a good time and I'm making some money doing this, I'm going to keep doing it. And it's fun to do. And I still travel, and I'll go to games, and I'll go to Super Bowls and go to major sporting events. But the bottom line is, you're right. You can't listen to any radio show without hearing constant interruptions. And again, that's how they make money. I understand that. I'm not saying, geez, radio is going to go out of business because there's too many commercials. I'm just saying that people have options. And even though I do a lot of entertainment-based stuff, when you're doing 180 consecutive minutes of content, that's basically like doing a 6-hour show on regular radio.
Right. If not longer. I want to, and we're visiting with Tony Bruno Show on Twitter, Bruno Nation Live on twitch.tv. I want to get your impressions as you watch now sports television, in particular ESPN and Fox. And you got CBS, NBC. Everybody's involved here because they're all tied to the leagues, especially the NFL, college football, NBA, MLB. And what I'm finding now is that you've got the broadcast networks really doubling down on those broadcast rights agreements as their business model. And we really have crossed into the realm, I think, of propaganda, where ESPN represents a propaganda piece. FS1 represents a propaganda piece for the National Football League. Have you noticed that? Am I off base in saying that?
No, you're absolutely right. And again, is that bad? No, that's the business model when you have major corporations who pay a lot of money for the rights fees, and then the rights holders obviously get perks out of that. But also, as the rights holder, as the company that pays the NFL for the product, you're basically beholden to them. They don't want, I mean, we know a lot of local radio people who go working for radio stations, and then they say something on the air, and the local team that's on, they criticize the team, and then the management of the team calls the radio station, says, get that guy off the air, and the guy's fired. So the clamps have been clamped.
Now, that's always existed. But my question is, has it gotten a lot worse?
Yes.
Because I think it has. Exactly. And that's why, again, it points to what you and I are doing, I think, as the future.
Again, yeah, I'm not sitting here saying, all of you guys in radio now, give up your jobs and go start a podcast. I mean, there's a podcast out there. There are people who've never sat before a microphone who could do it. And that's great. You know what the difference? Because people think, oh, I'm going to go ripping podcast. No, I don't. There's a million of them. And you know what? A lot of these people can find a niche. They can get a YouTube channel and do their own thing. And if people like it, they'll watch, just like radio or TV shows. If people like what they're watching or listening to, they're going to listen to it. And then you'll have more people coming in. And so a lot of people do it. They don't make any money. They get frustrated and they say, screw this. I'm just going to do something else for a living. But a lot of people do it just for fun. And a lot of people do it thinking that someday this is going to be, and a lot of people have turned into major personalities and make a lot of money doing this. But I don't think the average podcaster is thinking the way we used to think when I got into radio, that I'm going to move up the food chain and one day become a national sports talk host. I think most people just love the fact that they could be heard by other people sitting wherever they are. I'm in my basement. So the old, you're sitting in mom's basement. I'm sitting in my own basement, in my own studio that I built, and I'm doing a national talk show. So It's not about just, lonely guys sitting in the basement talking about sports or anything else. It's about wherever you're comfortable. You could do it from your home. You don't have to go schlepping around, going to studios. It's what you do when you can do it.
Somebody, and I'll let you go, Tony. Hopefully you come back, because I really want to talk to you more about a lot of this stuff and a lot about sports in general. But I had an executive in the radio business ask me the other day, and I'll leave the names out of the sports radio talk show host, daily show host on national radio. He asked me, why are those guys so successful? I said to this sports radio executive, because they have an FCC license. Yep. They have the FCC license. Yep. And so the principle of ratings for those, it's about clearance and it's about leveraging. And you were in that business, of course, in terms of a national perspective. But then when you talk about the ratings, sure, they're important and they're selling advertising to extent, but that's just a small little drop in the bucket. When you talk about broadcast rights agreements, it's really who owns that fire hose of distribution.
Absolutely. And that's the bottom line with the leagues. I mean, ESPN, as you mentioned, NBA is very big with them because they pretty much own the NBA. You know, remember, they had hockey, and when they had hockey, they would promote the heck out of hockey. Now that they're no longer in the hockey business, they pay it very little attention. They did the same thing with the arena. This isn't bad. This is called taking care of your clients. It's what any business does. You have a client, you take care of them. But when you would think, I think you're saying the same thing I'm thinking, that in the sports business, sports is sports, and if you don't have the NHL contract, you don't all of a sudden have the NHL contract and promote it like crazy and have shows based on it every night. And then when all of a sudden your contract runs out, you pay no attention to the National Hockey League, which is still one of the 4 major sports in this country. Regardless of what your personal feelings are, it's still a major sports entity. So that's what's changed in the business.
Yep.
That league.
Integrity.
Yeah. It's not even integrity. It's just who's paying me for my airtime. And then you got 5 different stations. So it's not like you can't dedicate time to a major sports league on one of the other stations. It's which league is paying you the most to air their product. And that's what it's all about. It's all business.
Tony, I can't thank you enough. It's really an honor to have you on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks, Brooks. It's great. And congratulations on your stuff there. You know, I haven't talked to you in a while. I've been out of LA since 2011. So I've been back and forth, but I've been in Philly now, hard to believe, since 2011. So it's been a long run, but I'm back home in my own house, in my own basement.
That's freaking phenomenal. And you got to watch this show, Bruno Nation Live, twitch.tv, and it's Tony Bruno Show on Twitter. Thanks again, Tony.
Thanks, Brooks. Good to talk to you, man.
That's Tony Bruno in Philadelphia. Jeez, no better guy to talk to. Just a little bit opinionated, right? A little bit like we are. But it really underlines. I mean, I don't want to be a hater. I don't want to criticize it, and you don't want to hear that. But again, I'm trying to get just a breakdown of the Eagles and the Packers on television this morning. Can't get it. Can't do it. Commercials, stage discussion, funny debate. We don't have the rights to the game tonight, so we're not going to be focused on it. So now when it comes to getting this breakdown, we got an amazing breakdown from Tony Bruno on the Eagles side of it. Of course, both teams. But now we're going to go out to Milwaukee and bring up Bart Winkler of Chuck and Winkler. He does Morning Drive on radio, 105.7 The Fan in Milwaukee. And we're going to talk to Bart about, it's funny, Bart. And Bart, I really appreciate you joining us. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm terrestrial radio, so I'm going to take a timeout in about 5 minutes, give you 6 minutes of commercials, and then I'll give you 4 minutes of breakdown to end this thing.
Right, exactly. And then you got to bring the sidekick in too, and talk about what you guys had for lunch, but I actually
boner pills. I've got a boner pill too,
right.
To give you a promo code for $5 off a boner pill. I can do that.
That's phenomenal. So now I lost my train of thought. That was so great. But it's Winks Thinks, WINKS Thinks on Twitter, 105.7 The Fan. And it's funny because when I put the thing up on Twitter that you're going to be coming on, we're so football zoned out centric, and it's just taken over our lives, just in my lifetime, to the point where the NFL has moved to the center of the culture that I didn't even, I recognized what the Brewers were doing, but I didn't think, wait a minute, this guy's in Milwaukee. I should put that in the promo. And you guys describe not the last 24 hours, just the month of September for the Brewers and what it's been like in that town.
It's been wild. I think for last year's team, when they were ascending and then getting to this point, I was lucky enough. I'd do the morning show, but then I would cover some games. And I was lucky enough. They clinched the playoff spot in St. Louis last year. They went to the NL Central tiebreaker in Chicago. So I went to those games. I covered those games. I got to be in the locker room, and it was It was amazing. I've never, as a fan, felt more connected to a team as I've grown up here my whole life. So I'm a fan of these teams too. Then this year, it's like you get one game away from the World Series. You don't really make that many additions if you're the Brewers. You have guys get hurt. You have guys that are struggling. They're like 2 games over 500 in July. The Cardinals are 5 games ahead. The Cubs are ahead. Any wild card team is ahead. And then football season starts. So I'm a guy that, like, last year I got so into the Brewers and the Packers went on the back burner and they kind of sucked then at that point. This year, all I want to do is watch football. I want to talk about the Packers.
Wisconsin.
I want to watch college. If there's a Monday night game between 2 bad teams, I was at the point I'd rather watch that than the Brewers. Yet they wouldn't die. They wouldn't lose. That's good, but they wouldn't go away. And so all of a sudden, they were like 5 games back of the Cubs 3 weeks ago, and now they're like 6.5 above. It's an 11-game swing, and it's just been unbelievable. And they're doing it with guys that really shouldn't be in this position, but it's a huge man to Craig, a huge compliment to Craig Counsell. Credit Craig Counsell for the job that he's done. And now they're in the playoffs, and now they could still win the NL Central if things shake out this weekend. So it's been amazing, because there's been times that Brooks' team, they were dead. And if any Brewer fan tells you that they believed all season long that they were going to make the playoffs, then they need to be checked out with someone, because that's not a way to live life. Because there was no chance, and now here they are in the playoffs.
Well, and from somebody outside of Milwaukee, and I think there's probably a lot of people watching this or have thought this, and I'm wondering what it was like when Yelich got hurt. I mean, wasn't it like a funeral on your show the next day for a day or two where you're thinking, well, now the season's really over?
Yeah, you lose Christian Yelich, your MVP. I mean, we've been blessed here in the state. We're watching some MVPs. We're watching Rodgers. Obviously, if the Packers lose Rodgers, we saw that they're done. The Bucks, if they lose Giannis, there might not be a Bucks team. They might be in Las Vegas or somewhere. But in baseball, it is a little different because there are so many different guys. But you do struggle and then lose your MVP, and they had every excuse to be absolutely done with it, and it's motivated them in some way. And he got to be a part of the celebration in Cincinnati last night on the road. So it's weird. It's weird. It's cool. It's wrong. It shouldn't be happening, but it's fun. And hopefully they can keep the unbelievable going for a little bit.
Last thing on the Brewers, though, you talk about Yelich. He's the team MVP. Hell, I'm seeing people on Twitter saying he should be the MVP of the league this year still, despite the injury. But when you look at how they got into the playoffs, the ultimate destination of the Brewers, where they are right now, if you look at team MVPs, you got Yelich, but then you got Craig Counsell is kind of, if Yelich is 1 in the MVP category for the Brewers, Counsell's probably 1A, right?
I do think that a lot of this season, Craig Counsell should get the credit for. I mean, his manager record in September since he took over in 2015, I believe he's the 3rd best September manager since then. They've just rattled off 17 and 19. This guy, you give him 40 guys to work with, even if they're not good or not, he just knows how to manage a September roster. And I think the biggest thing for him is I'm not sure there's a better guy in baseball that knows the truth of baseball, that it is 162 games. I think sometimes in the doldrums of summer, we kind of build baseball up as if each game means a little bit more, especially on the radio, because we've got nothing else to talk about.
Right.
So, we've got to build up these games like tonight, June 8th, Brewers Cubs. Is this the biggest game of the year to you? And
must win.
And yeah, must win in 162 games. And he's been so good at that if they go on a 4-game stretch and everybody around the team and all of us guys on the radio are saying fire trade, but if they go on a 4-game win streak, it's the same sort of levelness. And Craig Counsell, as much as I've been around him, I've never seen him like, he's always the same. He's just always the same. And you hear that about guys, and it's totally true with them. And I think that the team has kind of adapted that personality, and they are not here without Craig Counsell as the manager. And I don't know like how much people know about him nationally, but he is the perfect guy for this team.
We're visiting with Bart Winkler, Winks Thinks on Twitter. Chuck and Winkler, 107.5 Morning Drive in Milwaukee. Let's get to the Packers. And Packers off to this great start. What do you attribute that to?
The defense at this point. The defense has been very good. They have not allowed a fourth quarter point yet, and they've allowed just 3 points in the first quarter. And I think that when you look at the defense this year and you look at the defense pretty much the entire time Rodgers has had a defense, well, he hasn't. He's had guys that wear Packers jerseys, but, I mean, Clay Matthews was at the end of the rope. Nick Perry was their big linebacker. I don't even think he's playing right now. They started a guy named Ladarius Gunter as their number one cornerback in the NFC Championship game 3 years ago. I have no idea where he is at this point. So Rodgers has really never had a defense. And by getting rid of McCarthy, what I like to think is that with a new head coach who is going to bring a scheme in here that was actually a scheme and not just the same plays they've been running for 12 years, because McCarthy famously has not evolved very much. What I'd like to think is the Packers management staff, especially Brian Gutekunst, the GM, looked around and said, there's going to be a learning curve here on offense. Rodgers is a very smart guy, but he may have made some bad habits over the last few years with McCarthy as a head coach, who he thought he was smarter than and clearly was. So while they figure that out on offense, I'm going to go get guys like Zadarius Smith, who's already a team captain, right. Preston Smith. I'm going to get Adrian Amos. I'm going to draft Rashawn Gary. I'm going to draft Darnell Savage in the secondary. I already like my guys from last year, Josh Jackson, Jair Alexander. I like Kevin King there. Blake Martinez is good. And so he looked at these first 3 games, I think. They're going to struggle on offense, so win the games with the defense. We've seen some flashes from the offense, but nothing consistently over a quarter and a half in each of these games. So it has absolutely been the defense. On a team with Aaron Rodgers, you would think that it's Aaron Rodgers, but right now it has 100% been the defense.
And I think Gutekunst is probably the unsung MVP. Well, you just laid it out there of the season so far for the Packers. And it's kind of the last place we thought we would be for the Packers going in just 3 games in. Talking to Bart Winkler at 107.5, the Fan in Milwaukee. He hosts the Morning Drive show. Chuck and Winkler, Winks Thinks on Twitter. Now let's talk about what everybody wants to talk about, what I'm interested in, and your boots on the ground. How much of this offense is LaFleur? What's going on with that relationship? Is this thing going to work? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think that Rodgers at this point is still getting criticized for some of the stupidity of Mike McCarthy. Like, I think what has happened over the last 5 years, there was a point in there after they'd won the Super Bowl, and then there was that horrific NFC Championship game in Seattle where they blew a 16-point lead and had an onside kick go against them, gave up a 2-point conversion, lost in overtime. There was a point maybe around then or soon after where Rodgers realized that he knows more about football than Mike McCarthy. And he stopped listening to Mike, or he wanted to either prove that he was smarter too much, didn't think that McCarthy's way was right, so he would try to win it on his own, and McCarthy would want to set up the run. They'd check out into pass plays. There was a point there where that relationship, at least between coach and player, and maybe off the field it's different, but between coach and player, you can't have a quarterback that thinks he's the head coach, and I think that's what happened here. Because Mike McCarthy didn't evolve. You know, Mike McCarthy is telling these guys to do the same stuff they were doing 7 years ago.
And getting massages.
We're getting massages. Rodgers goes home, sits back, turns on Sunday Night Football, and he watches the Rams do these concepts that, the Packers don't even know exist. So Rodgers gets a little antsy. I want to do some of that stuff. They get a coach who's familiar with that kind of stuff, Matt LaFleur with the Sean McVay, Shanahan stuff. And now Rodgers, who I really do think wants to learn, is trying to figure out, he is an old dog that you need to teach new tricks to. He's willing to learn those new tricks, but there's still a lot of bad habits with the old stuff. So there's going to be a give and take between Rodgers and LaFleur. I think when you saw McCarthy and Rodgers maybe get into it, it was 100% the time Rodgers, in his head at least, saying, "You're dumb. I'm smarter than you, Mike." With Matt LaFleur and Rodgers, I think it really is a give and take of two guys trying to work together and make this work out as best as it can. And it helps now that they're doing all this without the pressure of having to catch up to these NFC North teams, at least now, because you've gotten off to that 3-0 start.
I risked my life, walked into the Lions' mouth with Tony Bruno and just told him I can't see a way that Philadelphia is going to win this game. Of course, Tony is the Philly legend, right? But realistically, I like the Packers a lot in this game tonight. It seems like an ascendant team. Seems like it's a team on the rise, and I'm sure it's got to be difficult for people in Wisconsin to kind of hold back a little bit, especially when you consider the defense. But if the Packers are going to win big tonight, or win going away against the Eagles, what do you think has to happen?
I think you need to see more out of the offense. I think because Rodgers 2 weeks ago against the Vikings, they had 3 drives. They went up 21-0. I mean, I thought they might flirt with 50, and then they don't score again, at least as a touchdown. Last week, another quick drive. Rodgers looks vintage Rodgers. He's getting guys off sides, and then the offense stuttered out there. It just needs to be they need to just commit to that offense. Rodgers can't hold on to the ball too long. There's a lot of times where he has checkdowns, but I still think in the back of his head, he wants that long 40-yard pass, and he's got to take what the defense gives to them. So we'll see if they do that tonight. If the only thing that would have me nervous that the Packers lose tonight, I guess there's 2. And I heard you guys talking about it with Tony, and it's stupid. I mean, is this a must-win game? You can say that it's not for the Eagles, but if they were, for some reason, if they won on Sunday, if they were 2-1, I'd feel better about the Packers winning than if the Eagles were 1-2. Because you don't want to start 1-3, and you do.
Right.
There's a little more, whether it's a must-win or not. There's more pressure on the Eagles tonight. And the other thing is, we talked here about last week being a trap game, Denver, before the Eagles game on Thursday. I almost think that tonight could be a trap game for the Packers. They should win. Eagles are banged up. Packers defenses look great. The Packers have this long bye coming up, and then they have to go to Dallas, which could be 2 undefeated teams right there. So I don't want them looking ahead to that one. Everything that is logical and it is right tells you the Packers should win this game. But to tie it back to before, everything that was logical and was right told you that the Brewers were never, ever going to get back to the playoffs this year, and they did. So anything can happen, but I do like the Packers tonight as well.
That's why we're talking about it. There's no script. You never know. It could be upside down tomorrow. But I think you talked a little bit about Rodgers holding on to the ball too long, trying to go for the home run. And that's not Matt LaFleur. That's not Sean McVay. And what I'm hearing from you and what I've seen is Aaron Rodgers really has to come to grips with who he is in terms of his playing personality on the field. And I just wonder about how that's going to play out between him and LaFleur, because he's got to take what the defense gives if you're going to live within the confines of Matt LaFleur's offense. Is that kind of the process that we're going through, where Rodgers is now going through this transition where he's no longer having to carry the whole load, and that he's got to fit into this system and he's got to buy into it? Is that the transition we're working through here?
Yeah, I think so. If you watch some of these drives so far with LaFleur in the Packer system, and then when he was offensive coordinator or even worked in other teams, there's a bit more sequencing. Against the Vikings, they ran a play where Aaron Jones went out, and then Jamal Williams was over the middle, and then one play they give it to Jones, and then the next play they run like the same play, but they're trying to set up because they wanted Jamal Williams on that touchdown, and they ended up getting to him. I think there is more a reason for the madness rather than just going back and dropping back. I think in a weird way, this Matt LaFleur offense, we'll call it, in McVay and Shanahan, they've never had a quarterback like Rodgers. It's always been guys that they can mold. Like Jared Goff still gets to the line and waits for Sean McVay to tell him what to do. Yeah. Whereas Rodgers, he obviously knows, he's been doing this so long that he can, for the most part, tell what defense is coming to him. He just doesn't know what LaFleur wants to do. So Rodgers, in a way, needs to play down to the simple offensive techniques, but also not lose the things that make him Aaron Rodgers, and use those when it's time to use those. So it is a weird balancing act. That's why you've seen a couple of, blow-ups on the sidelines. Ultimately, I think that they'll get there, but again, without that defense helping them out, I mean, they could be 0-3 right now.
Let's go off the board for 1 second before we let you go, Bart. And I got the radio station wrong a couple of times. 105.7 The Fan. That's in Milwaukee, and Bart's co-host of Chuck
I got
and
it for you right here.
I know. I'm saying 107.5, and you're freaking.
Everyone does. Everyone does. I don't know why.
Hell,
everyone does.
So what about Wisconsin? I mean, what are people thinking there? Is this the real deal, or is Michigan just terrible? Of course, Wisconsin always plays the horrible non-conference schedule, but do you have a read on that team? Could this be a great run for them this year?
I don't think anybody thought they would be as good as they've been at this point. To not allow a point in the first 10 quarters that they've played has been remarkable. And then to do that to Michigan and really embarrass a program to the point of that might be a fork in the road moment for Michigan. I don't think anybody saw that coming. The Badgers around here, I mean, they play on Saturdays, as we know. Unless you live in Madison, everybody likes the Badgers, but it's kind of like, I'm going to rake the leaves today.
Pat him on the head. You pat him on the head. Yeah.
I have the Badger game on while I'm raking the leaves, and it's nice. It's a nice fall thing. I'll turn the game on and maybe have a Bloody Mary. Yeah, it's nice. Because what normally happens is, you win a couple games, you lose, and then what are you playing for? A Rose Bowl, whatever, if that matters. But then when there's these seasons where they get that first big win, then everyone's kind of like, oh yeah, this could be something. And I think we're all kind of looking ahead to Ohio State a month from today. They've got 4 more games in between there. But if they could be undefeated going into that game against Ohio State, then you could look at something. And the teams they have coming up, Kent State and Northwestern this weekend, I mean, the Badgers have a defense that's top in the country. They've got maybe the best running back in the country. And then they've got a quarterback who actually can make plays. A lot of the times the quarterbacks here are like, throw to the tight end if you can get it that far, and then hand it off to our all-world running back. This guy can make plays, Jack Cohn. So I think there's optimism with the Badgers. I don't know if we measure up or if we think they measure up to Ohio State yet, but I think they'll be undefeated into that game, and then that's when we'll see the real test.
Now you've got the Bucks, you've got the Brewers. We're talking about the Badgers. You got the Packers. I mean, is this as good as it gets for a sports radio host right now? What you're doing?
As a fan, I wish that the year ended in September because then all of our teams would be good. We have so much heartbreak in Wisconsin. And it's a weird heartbreak. It's like we get to the point right before the championship and then we lose. The Packers did that a bunch. The Brewers NLCS last year. The Bucks Eastern Conference Finals. Then there's like teams those are the top teams. And then, okay, I guess I'll like Wisconsin basketball this year because they're good. And then they go to the championship game and then they can't even win it. It is great because there's that constant, as a radio host now, it's great because there's like that constant level of you're almost there, but it never quite comes. But it's
right.
Just there enough that you keep coming back for more. It is very much an addiction and a drug, sports in this state. And being a radio host, talking about it has been a good benefit.
But now, if Aaron Rodgers is going to get along with Matt LaFleur, isn't that going to kill your show? If Aaron Rodgers isn't running around, we don't have all this intrigue.
Well, he still hates his parents. He still hates his brothers.
Right.
There's always something with Rodgers.
It is a little weird. Not little weird. It's very weird.
The Packers, they get out to these 3-0 starts. And so some of these games, it's like, I mean, they look good. Defense. What can you really say? You can't crack a mic and say, defense look good. So we'll just say like, Aaron Rodgers, phone lines ring up, tweets come in, and then suddenly the Packers are 3-0. They look great on defense, and we're doing a referendum on Aaron Rodgers again. Right, very easy stuff.
All right. Well, hey, Bart, I really appreciate it, man. Got to have you back sometime. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, and we'll talk soon.
Outstanding. Bart Winkler, Winks Thinks on Twitter, Chuck and Winkler, 1057 The Fan. It was right on his jacket. I said 107.5 The Fan like 16 times during the interview. Classic stuff. Talking about Aaron Rodgers. And, he's a cottage industry. That's national radio. That's television. That's ESPN First Take, FS1. They live off that stuff. That's their lifeblood. Nothing to talk about when the defense is good and they're 3-0. As I said to you before, I sat there and I watched ESPN this morning. I just can't bring myself to watch FS1 once in a while because it's so overly staged. Now, you have the earliest show. What is it? First Things First, I think, with Nick Wright and Chris Carter. And God knows there probably aren't a lot of you who watch that show. But I like Nick Wright. But that show comes off at, it's like you're watching CNBC. It's this really serious show about, first of all, I love Nick Wright, but he's really serious about sports. I mean, every little thing. And it reminds me a little bit of Ryan Clark. You ever watch him on ESPN? RC is Mike Greenberg. Mike Greenberg's got his guys. Dominique Foxworthy, Ryan Clark. I don't know. Dominique Foxworthy is kind of the Ryan Clark of this year on Get Up. And I realize this may be arcane stuff. You don't watch it or whatever it is, but this is my job. So I watch that stuff, and you can glean occasionally something. I'm watching it less and less, but Ryan Clark's the kind of guy. He's always got this look. You know what I'm saying? Whenever he does his commentary, he's really serious on the point of almost tears. Like, oh my God, the world is collapsing around me. But to his credit, Jeff Foxworthy, Dominic Foxworthy. Dominic Foxworthy, unintentional comedy. Occasionally, they're kind of, it's Foxworth. Oh, it's not. Cam Smith, our producer in Boston, is helping me out on that. Let me look that up. I just called him Dominic Foxworthy, and my producer Cam Smith sent me a note saying it's Foxworth. Let me look that up. When you're an old guy, I am the kind of person that I hate. He just corrected me. And it's obviously Dominic Foxworth. Of course it is. And I said Foxworthy. Jeff Foxworthy, right? Of course. But it's Dominic Foxworth. We're talking about, he's an ESPN. He's a host or an analyst. Not a host. Big difference, right? Like, it matters. But he's an analyst on Get Up, which is a morning show on ESPN. And he's at the analyst host table with Mike Greenberg. And, of course, they shuttle guys in and out, and he's one of the guys, in case you don't know. And he's a former NFL player, NFL DB, who played for the Denver Broncos, also played for the Falcons and Ravens. Dominique Foxworth. But so I don't even know why we were talking about how we got into talking about him, except for he's kind of this year's version of Ryan Clark, where Greeny has him there at the table. That's cool. These guys are all, I'm sure, nice guys. But so you either have the stage discussion, the phony debate, where everybody plots out in advance what they're going to say. And there are shows where clearly they're doing that, because I was part of those shows. I did that stuff in sports radio in the past in my career. And this predates Embrace Debate on ESPN and FS1, which was started by a guy named Jamie Horowitz, who's now at DAZN. But it started really with Cold Pizza, that old show on ESPN2 with our friend of the show, Jay Crawford. The whole debate principle where we stake out positions, no matter how ridiculous they may seem at times, just to have some sort of conflict. That's what consultants that you deal with in sports media, when you're doing talk shows, talk about. We need to engender a conflict, make it more interesting. You got to pick one side. Don't be in the middle of the road, or you'll be roadkill. Well, that's what you got beginning on Cold Pizza on ESPN. And then they turned it into they formalized it, if you will, with the show First Take. And that was a production of Jamie Horowitz, a creation of Jamie Horowitz, who then went on and did the similar stuff that we have. He moved over to Fox FS1 and created Undisputed. Skip Bayless was part of that first iteration at ESPN with Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless. Cold Pizza, First Take. Skip goes over to FS1, does Undisputed, and now, of course, Stephen A. Smith is your anchor, the top personality, at the top of the marquee over Max Kellerman on First Take. I'm actually interested in talking about that a little bit more as we move along, how ESPN has shifted, how it approaches, how it promotes First Take, because there's been a shift. And let's bring up Ross Dellinger of SI, Sports Illustrated, Cam, our producer, Cam Smith, as I'm blathering on about ESPN, what's going on television in the morning. But now let's talk to somebody who goes through a lot of shoe leather, well-traveled, Ross Dellinger, who entertained us over the weekend from Athens, Georgia. Ross, I appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Yeah, good to be here.
So before we get into the D'Eriq King story, because I think that's one of the more fascinating stories of the college football season so far, talk about your experience at Athens, Georgia, because, man, you were captivating Twitter before, during, and after the game.
Yeah, it was fun. It was an incredible environment, and I expected it, but I hadn't covered a game in a long time there, and it was really cool to see two top 10 teams, and basically you're watching like a college football quarterfinal. Basically, is what it felt like. That's what it felt like to me. If we had quarterfinal round on campus or something, that's probably what it would have the feel of. But it was an incredible atmosphere, and kind of a boring game, so to speak, a little bit. I think it was a very SEC type of game, defense and special team kind of mistake and all that stuff. But no real great fireworks offensively until late. We saw some stuff, but clearly two really good football teams going at it in a great atmosphere.
And I said this on Twitter after the game. I'd like to think, Notre Dame has a joke schedule. And of course, when they scheduled this thing a decade out, you can make the argument that some of those schools you thought were going to be much better than they are. But the way things have broken for Notre Dame on their schedule, that's a cakewalk. And so with the performance against Georgia, do you think Notre Dame ensured themselves, having an opportunity to win the game in the last possession, being in the college football playoff conversation?
Maybe. It's so hard for Notre Dame, I think, to lose any games at all and get in. I think because they don't play that extra championship game, I do think there's a bias probably on teams that don't play in a conference. And so it's going to be hard. I think if they run the table, they'd have to have other people obviously lose, and maybe they'd have to have they probably have to have a lot of people lose. So it's tough for me to see a one-loss Notre Dame getting in. But I guess if the chips fall a certain way, they could. But they'd almost, every year, because they don't have that extra game, they don't have that conference, not affiliated with a conference. I think every year they're pretty much going to have to go undefeated to get in, unless you have that crazy year where you have, not just 5 or 6 one-loss teams, but maybe some 2-loss teams even in there in the top 5 or something, and then maybe they squeeze in. But it's going to be tough.
Before we get to D'Eriq King, I want to ask you one last thing, because we've been talking about this, and we got this ridiculous poll going on right now with a ton of votes flowing in on my Twitter timeline. Best college football game day environment. And you're just at Georgia. I wanted to get your take. What do you think it is? Because this is your job. You're everywhere. You're on these campuses. What do you think is the best college football game day environment?
Well, I'm going to be biased. Coming from growing up around the SEC and mainly my career was spent covering the SEC. So my experience is almost probably 80% of it's been in the SEC. And that is where obviously the bigger crowds are usually, and you have the bigger tailgating. So, it's hard to say that there's a better game day than a night game in Tiger Stadium at LSU. If there is, I have not experienced.
Now, but we're including tailgating in that. Would you put LSU at the top of all of college football, tailgating and environment in game?
It's pretty amazing tailgating. Not just the kind of food, but the amount of people. I think they usually estimate that they have about the same amount of people on campus for a night game as they do inside the stadium while the game's going on. So basically double the 100,000. So they roughly have about 200,000 on campus every game. So just the amount of people and the amount of food and drink, it's an incredible experience. But there's great, tailgate specifically. There's great all around the SEC and all around the nation. Obviously, I've experienced great tailgating at Georgia. Was good. Ole Miss has got a great tailgating scene, obviously. But yeah, my experience, just because I'm only a year or so out of being a beat writer, I'm a year just doing this national thing. It's almost exclusively in the SEC. So yeah, I'm going to be biased with a lot of that, of course.
What about Texas? Because you were just there.
Texas is interesting. It's such a big city. I think it changes the way the game day is and feels. And you're in a city of like, I don't know what Austin's like, more than 500,000 people, I believe now. In Austin, the city is unbelievable. I had a great time there, spent a week in Austin. It's a really cool place with great food and great people. You know, it was funny, probably that Wednesday leading up to the LSU Texas game, I was talking to a longtime Texas fan in a bar or something in Austin, and they were telling me, oh, wait till you see the tailgating on Saturday. It's going to be amazing. We surround the stadium, all this stuff. And he didn't know that I had previously been an SEC beat writer. And once he figured
right,
he came back and he said, wait, hold on, I think I've raised expectations too much. And he was right, because while it was good tailgating, there was obviously a lot of people there. It was nothing like I experienced at LSU and all that. I mean, there aren't many people with crawfish boiling, gumbo, jambalaya pots, spread over campus. You just don't get that at a lot of places.
Visiting with Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated, did an article on D'Eriq King. D'Eriq King is a quarterback from the University of Houston. And one of the big stories so far of college football is come to find out that D'Eriq King, Ross, and you are really at the cutting edge of this story, has decided that he's going to sit out the rest of the season. Kind of lay out that story for us. What's going on?
Yeah, it was one of the more bizarre stories that I've seen in college football in general. We've had some bizarre stuff, but this one was very unusual. The new redshirt rule came into effect last year. Kids can play 4 games and then redshirt. And we've seen that used a lot of different ways. We've seen obviously Kelly Bryant at Clemson last year. He played his 4 games, then he decided to transfer after losing the starting job. We've seen the receiver at Oklahoma State kind of do the same thing. He wasn't getting enough playing time after 4 games, so he left. This case, you got a star quarterback who didn't lose his job, but his team is 1-3, and he's got a first-year coach, and he's decided to use the redshirt rule, but stick around, he says. And again, things going on here. One,
weird.
I'll believe that D'Eriq King is staying at Houston when I see it next year, when 2020 season rolls around. And so talking to people at Houston, there's some other things here. I just want to say that first, that he claims that he's going to stay. Well, I have my doubts. Like a lot of people have their doubts. But I'll say this: the kid likes college. He wants to stay in college another year. I've heard he wants to get his master's degree. He's under first-year coach in Dana Holgorsen. Dana, spent some time with Dana in April over there in Houston, and he kind of lamented the fact that a lot of his kids on his team should have been redshirted early in their career. And specifically with D'Eriq, he told me he wished he had more time with them. So he's going to get more time to develop with them, I guess. So there's some factors there, but the ultimate thing is this is all very weird. And I don't – it paints the scene like they're punting kind of on the season, and they claim that's not going on. They had a big press conference earlier this week to say, hey, we're not punting, we're not quitting. But it's the whole thing is bizarre.
What about his father, D'Eriq King? Because I think the indication is that he wants D'Eriq King to leave, or has said that his son wants to leave.
Yeah, he said to a TV station down there in Houston when all this stuff was breaking, he said that his son was leaving and transferring. So apparently there was a meeting then after that with Holgorsen, and they came to some kind of terms that he would stay, or that he would at least say he would stay for now. So it's all very interesting. I'll say there's one more thing to this too. I talk about that I don't believe that he's necessarily going to have my doubts that he's going to actually return. When the news broke on Twitter about this, I'd heard that D'Eriq King's phone lit up with just dozens and dozens of coaches,
wow,
trying to get him out of there. That's going to continue, I'm sure, through the course of the season. And is he going to be tempted to leave for a big-time major college program with all the pieces offensively except a quarterback? And we've seen it happen so many times. I know a lot of people have talked about Oklahoma, but there's a lot of programs in that. LSU will be in that situation. There's a lot of programs that will be in that situation. So I'm sure he'll be tempted to leave, and it'll be hard for me to see him not leaving. But we'll see.
What's your assessment of Dana Holgorsen? I know it's really, really early, and you have the element of recruiting in college football. So really, it's almost impossible right now, because even if a guy were to get off to a great start, how many times have we seen guys, Mike Archer, you think back the old-time LSU guy where he got off to a great start and then it collapsed because of the recruiting. We've seen that happen at Oregon recently. We've seen that happen a lot of times. So you can't really jump the gun. Very difficult. But what do you think about the job he's doing so far?
Yeah, you could go back in college football history and find so many coaches that succeeded their first.
I pulled that one out, didn't I, Mark Archer?
Just tanked. Mike. I mean, just think of so many. But Dana, they were close. I mean, they lost those. Tulane was a one-possession game. Washington State was a one-possession game. Feels like they've been right there, and they've just lost those close games. And actually, I was impressed with their second half against Oklahoma. I thought they looked pretty good. They played pretty well. They had a chance at an onside kick late in that game. They've been close. They just haven't won those close games. And, and now they're going to be missing their star quarterback. So I wonder if, in a way, the administration there thinks, well, Dana gets a pass for year one, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how they're going to view things. But they've been really, really close. They just man, your record in one-score games is often what defines you. And right now they're on the losing side of it.
You wrote an article earlier this week. We're visiting with Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated. Before we let you go, you wrote an article about the Group of Five schools, and it's the eternal lament about they want more recognition. They want to be part of the national championship, of course, conversation, discussion, and get an opportunity to play for a national title. That's never happened in the history of college football. It's what really kind of makes it unique. Now, what also I think has made it unique, Ross, over the years is no playoff. And so we only got a playoff when John Skipper of ESPN woke up one morning on the right side of the bed and wrote a huge check to make that playoff happen. That's my impression. So, and I know we've discussed this many times. You discussed it in your article, the prospect of a college football playoff. You did it in the context of the Group of Five, but just in general, I mean, what do you think is going to have to happen? Because I want to say in that article, you intimated that it's probably going to be inevitable sooner than later.
Yeah, when you talk to executives on the high level of college football, you get a sense this thing's expanding 8 teams, and it's math. You got 4 playoff spots, you've got 5 power conferences. Teams are getting left out. So I think that's eventually push it to expand. However, you expand it, and the current sitting committee told me, Frank Beamer, you need to have a spot for a group of 5 teams.
Really?
A lot of people, and certainly Bob would agree with that. Let us have a chance to get in. College football, great. We love college football. It's amazing, the passion, but it's something that all other American sports have, and that opportunity for every team to potentially win a national title. It doesn't have that. So I think we get that. We're going to eventually get an playoff.
Man, I really appreciate you jumping on with me, man. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon, Ross. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, man.
That's Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated, SI Now on Twitter. But Ross is Ross Dellinger. It's Ross, all one word, DELLENGER on Twitter. National college football writer. Covered the LSU beat for many years. And if anybody can give you an insight into a game day atmosphere in SEC country, it's Ross. And, when I did that poll, if you're on the show right now watching, I thought about putting LSU in there instead of Alabama, but I just thought I'd play it straight, keep the ball in the fairway. And of course, when I put that on the poll, Alabama's got like 7% of the votes, and LSU's all over the replies and the comments, and people are calling me out. So, but we'll get back. That's kind of a recurring theme here on Sports by Brooks. That's just something I love to talk about. I went to the University of Georgia. I've got thoughts about that. We've talked about it a lot in the last couple of days. So, and now let's go to a guy who might have an opinion on this subject, who went to Ohio State. Robert Littell, blacksportsonline.com, BSO on Twitter, at the cutting edge of sports and celebrity news. The hottest, for my money, sports media feed on Twitter. and I mean that in the best possible way, because we're in the same boat here, Robert. We've been doing somewhat similar things over the years. And so, I mean that in the best possible way from a journalistic standpoint. You're documenting stuff. You're not doing clickbait. You're not doing clickbait because a lot of the things that you're doing, and again, we talked about this now we're talking about Jalen Ramsey. And this is a situation you can speak to specifically when we're talking about him going to the birth of his girlfriend's, his child with his girlfriend. That's why one of the big reasons why I wanted to get you on. I also wanted to talk about Spence Porter. But of course, we're visiting with Robert Littau, blacksportsonline.com, BSO on Twitter. But let's lead off, first of all, by the breaking news. Jalen Ramsey. I mean, what are your thoughts on that whole situation, first of all?
Well, I think Jalen Ramsey is very smart. It's one thing to just, leave or be disgruntled. But what can they really do if you say, I'm injured or I'm sick or my, girlfriend is having a baby? Yeah, that's pretty smart. I think that's learning from Antonio Brown. Like Antonio Brown did the whole, social media and complaining and fighting. Jalen Ramsey said, I'm not going to do that. I want to get traded or I want to be released, but I'm going to do it in a way. What they're going to say, if you say your back hurts, it's really hard to diagnose a bad back. You know what I mean? Really hard to diagnose a flu. If you say you're sick, what can they do? And then who's going to say, well, we're going to find you for going to be with your girlfriend while she's having a baby? He switched it around to where I would say people know what he's doing, but the Jaguars are handcuffed because if they were to make a move on him, the public opinion, I think, would be on his side. So, I mean, I know what it is, and, I can understand why the Jaguars may be a little bit upset about it, but I think it's brilliant, to be honest with you.
Right. What's your opinion of that whole dynamic between Marrone, Coughlin, Shad Khan, and Jalen Ramsey? Because I think there's a hell of a lot going on in this story that's not being talked about. I mean, this story is essentially behind the scenes. We don't know anything.
Yeah, I think honestly I can tell you this. The Coughlin people, they don't like Coughlin. Coughlin is an old school guy. These are new school players, and that's never meshed. And I can tell you just from some of my sources down there, it really kind of hit the fan. It really has nothing to do with Ramsey. It has to do with Leonard Fournette. If you remember, Leonard Fournette got into a little dust up and got suspended by the NFL, and Coughlin took away his guaranteed money. Said, we're not, because of this, we're not going to give you any guaranteed money. And Fournette was like, hey, I was helping a teammate who was fighting on the field, and you're going to take away my guaranteed money. So the whole infrastructure is fractured to where I think the Jaguars players love each other and are a team, but it's fractured with upper management. And Ramsey being the highest profile person from that is like, I can't trust you. And since I can't trust you, I want out. And I think that is an extension of the coach. So I think it's, Marrone and Coughlin. But I think they feel like Marrone doesn't really run anything. It's like Coughlin is technically the coach. Kind of how Bill Parcells used to be when he used to take those executive roles. Like you knew you had a coach, but Bill Parcells was the real coach. And I just think that's not meshing well.
If I'm Shad Khan and I'm looking at this deception going on from Jalen Ramsey, and it's I don't want to call it bizarre because there's been a lot more bizarre things. I mean, Antonio Brown, your organization is broken and it's a laughingstock. And Tom Coughlin is responsible for it. And Tom Coughlin should be gone. I mean, This is a joke. What's happening?
I think if they, like you said, if Coughlin and Marrone were gone, like I think if Khan went to Jalen Ramsey and said, listen, we want you here long term, they won't be here long term. I think you'll be back tomorrow.
I think that you see a lot of media people out, and they're the reactionary people out there who are blaming this on. We just see this in a vacuum from what we see with the antics of Jalen Ramsey off the field, and then of course the brief confrontation that he had with Doug Marrone, which, by the way, to a certain extent, Jalen Ramsey was backed in that situation by his own teammates, putting their arms out at Doug Marrone. I don't know if you saw that video. I think it's DJ Braden at the other corner. I thought it was fascinating, right? And it speaks to your point about how Marrone is an instrument of Tom Coughlin. So that's really who they're responding to at that point. But you see the media, they're portraying Jalen Ramsey as an Antonio Brown. Is there a big difference here in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a big difference from the time that accusations came upon Antonio Brown. Now, if you look at it up to the point where he's just dealing with the Raiders and he's making, social media videos and talking about his helmet and his feet and stuff, I didn't think none of that was really serious. And you could make a correlation.
Now, Ramsey did some.
Ramsey
what did Ramsey have?
Once,
he had a hot air balloon, or no, he had the tank. So right,
the tank. He brought the tank. Yeah. So the correlation from that point, but like I tell people, there's always a line. Like, okay, well now we're talking about sexual assault and walking around naked and having sex with people painting and that's a different level. And I don't think a lot of times, like you said, media will associate. You got two guys and they're doing things, but one thing is criminal elements to it, and the one thing is just I don't want to be here, just kind of pouting and stuff like that. So I think up to a point, it was like Antonio Brown, but then Antonio Brown thing went way left, and that's why he's not playing. Right now he's not playing because he called Mike Mayock a name or brought in the hot air balloon. He's not playing because of these. He can't stay off his phone and then the text messages and things like that. So I think maybe there's a worry that it could get that way with Jalen Ramsey.
Visiting with Robert Lital, of course, BSO on Twitter, Black Sports Online. Now let's talk about something that it's because ESPN, this is just my opinion, but because ESPN does not have the Spence Porter fight, it's off the radar for a lot of people. They completely ignore it. Now, if we have an MMA fight, Jesus, it's all over everywhere, right? If it's ESPN. But you're covering Errol Spence Jr., taking on Sean Porter. That's a pretty damn good matchup from PBC and Hal Heyman. And you were down there covering it here in Los Angeles. I mean, what are your thoughts on that fight?
Well, first, let me say, even though, like you said, ESPN has been very light on other fights that aren't on the ESPN network, but in this case, they're going up against Fox and not just FS1. They're going up against the big Fox Sports, and what they have, what Fox has that ESPN doesn't have is they got Sean Porter on the NFL, show. They have Errol Spence hanging out with Jerry Jones before the big Cowboys national televised game. They have these commercials running all the time. So I think I would say more people know about this fight than if, it was Terrence Crawford or something fighting on ESPN or whatever it may be. Yeah. So it's a good fight. I think that Sean Porter deserves a lot of credit. While he's a big underdog, but he's also a big personality. So, them bickering back and forth and all of the FS1 shows, the fight camps, the Inside PBC, they do an excellent job at promoting the fight to where I think this fight may do current Manny Pacquiao type of pay-per-view numbers, not like Manny in his prime.
400,000?
Manny against Keith Thurman.
400,000, you think?
Huh? Yeah, they're tracking 400, 500,000, which for a fight that doesn't include Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather from back in the day is a very high amount. And I think that's a credit to what I think they see as Spence as the new face of boxing. Now, I know ESPN wants you to think it's Lomachenko or like I said, Bud Crawford, but I think Spence has the type of upward trajectory that he could be that next real pay-per-view guy, especially if, like they're saying, he beats Sean and then he steps into a Manny Pacquiao fight.
It'll be interesting. I'm not so sure Manny wants that fight, but who knows? It might depend on the money. But it's fascinating. And then when you look at the dynamic of a Bud Crawford, in the context of an Errol Spence, it really is tragic in a way that we don't just have a normal situation. Maybe at some point, maybe the Fury. I was going to ask you, do you think that the Fury Wilder fight represents a thaw in the Cold War between Al Heyman and Bob Arum?
Yeah, I think that's, I think it can be done. It's not that in my opinion, and what I've learned maybe over the last couple of years or so is if they really, really, really want to fight and there's enough money involved, that thaw, they don't have to talk to each other. They got other people to talk to each other and they get it done. The Wilder and what people don't know about Al Heyman and PBC is their guys are not locked into Fox. They're not locked into Showtime. They can fight on other networks. So it gives them flexibility that a top-ranked guy or a Golden Boy guy doesn't have because when they do their contracts, they're locked into the network. So, it has to be like Wilder has much more flexibility to make a pay-per-view than Fury would have or Anthony Joshua. But if the fight has enough money involved, I think it will. Now, I think with Bud Crawford and Errol Spence, I think Errol Spence would take that fight anytime they wanted to take the fight. If they came to the table and said, hey, this is the money, this is the joint. It's just I believe Top Rank has been slow footing that, and to a detriment of Bud Crawford, because there was a time where I would say 9 out of 10 people would say, hey, Bud Crawford's ahead of Errol Spence. But because Spence is getting all of this promotion, all of this, things, and fighting in Cowboy Stadium and all this, and now people are saying, well, hey, Spence is the guy, and Bud Crawford is
Bud Crawford's got to be dying. He's fighting in Omaha Civic Auditorium. And yeah, I mean, it's the truth. I mean, Errol Spence is playing it. He's at Staples, and he was at Cowboy Stadium. And people know who he is. People have no idea who Bud Crawford is. That's not because of Bud Crawford, but a lot of times the way it comes out, because of course ESPN they have the news context, the journalism context, the credibility context. It comes out that Bob Arum is the white knight, so to speak, no pun intended, right? And Al Heyman is the bad guy. And in the way that you're laying it out, and in the way that Wilder took that fight with Fury, it looks like the opposite might be true.
Listen, have you ever heard any boxer say, hey, Al Heyman cheated me?
Hell no.
Al Heyman didn't make me money. Al Heyman
the opposite is true with Al Heyman.
And no one ever said, like, the thing is, Al Heyman doesn't talk. And I've seen him twice in my entire career, so I feel lucky that I actually spoke with him once. And so I feel like I'm a white knight in that regard. But you've never heard a fighter say, Al Heyman did me wrong. Now, you heard that about Oscar. You heard that about Bob Arum and everything. So, I was listening. Spence actually was talking to us the other day, and he said, when I got with Al Heyman, a lot of other companies were coming at me. He said, the reason I liked Al Heyman, because one of the first things Al Heyman said is, we're going to make your career into this, but we're also going to think about what you're going to do after your career, how to invest your money, how to get you your own promotional company. All of this, and, with these other promoters, they just, when you're done, you're done.
Right.
They don't think about you long term. So I think Al Heyman will work with Bob Arum, but like I said, everything just has to be on the right side.
We're visiting with Robert Littal, BSO on Twitter, Black Sports Online. All right, one of the big stories, elephant in the room story in boxing, and I'm kind of wondering if something's gonna break here in the near future, is about Oscar De La Hoya. And I think this has been the most undercovered story, maybe in sports, over the past 6-9 months. His relationship, Golden Boy Promotions, everybody knows Oscar De La Hoya, the great boxer, but his promotional company has one of the highest profile fighters in Canelo Alvarez. And that relationship has essentially exploded, even though Alvarez, it appears, still with Golden Boy. Now you have one of the lower level fighters, but still a prospect, Ryan Garcia, going out on Twitter, calling Oscar out. I mean, what do you think's really going on here with Oscar De La Hoya personally?
Well, Canelo is at that level where I think he realizes, hey, I don't need a promoter. Honestly, I'm Canelo Alvarez. He can fight you and me and probably, do big, numbers. And I think one of the problems is when you get to that level, you don't like other people speaking for you. And what I found out was that Oscar told, DAZN that, hey, if you bring over Canelo, if you bring over Triple G, I guarantee you there's going to be a third, Triple G fight. Well, he didn't go over that with Canelo. And Canelo's like, I don't want to fight him, and I'm the fighter. So
really, that's what happened. I didn't know
that's exactly what happened. Like they gave Triple G, $100 million.
Wow.
With the promise that, hey, you're gonna fight, Canelo for a third time, and that's how they figured they were gonna get their subscribers up. But then when it was time, it was supposed to be this September. It was supposed to be the 14th.
So that is what explains why Oscar is seemingly soft pedaling it.
Yes, because Canelo feels that he won. Well, he feels the first fight was close. Feels like he won the second fight clearly. He feels like there's always controversy, and he has nothing else. He doesn't like Triple G anymore. They used to be pretty cool, but he doesn't like Triple G because Triple G talked about him bad when he got caught with the quote-unquote tainted meat and everything. So he's like, I don't want to give Triple G another fight. But Oscar had already told these executives that, hey, this is who
and that's the reason,
and that's why they couldn't get.
And that's the reason DAZN signed Triple G. They wouldn't have signed Triple G later if it wasn't for the Canelo. You talk about a disconnect. So then it looks like Oscar's promising John Skipper and Markowski over at DAZN. Oh yeah, we'll make this fight, but now Canelo doesn't want to make the fight.
There's no way that they signed him to the amount of Triple G to the amount of money that they did without having assurances from somebody that he was going to fight Canelo. And plus, I don't think Triple G would have signed without assurances. And they told Triple G, hey, if you sign with DAZN,
Right,
we'll get you Canelo. But now he doesn't have Canelo. So I think Ryan Garcia, who's under Canelo, sees all of this, sees how it's being treated. He didn't like, some of the things that went on with the last fight. Now, they gave him some, an extended contract and some more money and everything, but I don't think this is the end
what about
of that situation.
the whispers, and I hate to start a whispering campaign, but what about the whispers about Oscar De La Hoya and a possible some issues with him off, away from the ring? I know he's not in the ring, away from his duties, taking care of these guys in Canelo and his stable of fighters, because you can't swing a dead cat. I know you were just covering the weigh-in. You can't swing a dead cat at those events without hearing the whispers about Oscar perhaps having some personal peccadillos here popping up, if you will.
Well, as you know, it's been like that with Oscar for
right
years. That, I mean, he almost lost his company like a coup because he wasn't around because of some of those things. I remember, if I'm not mistaken, when Canelo fought Mayweather, he no-showed because of so much stress, quote unquote, that he couldn't do it. And this, stress. This is something, like you said, that people, people that have seen Oscar out in various things over the years, that depending on the day, it could be some issues. There are people, thankfully, behind the scenes that run the company on a day-to-day basis, or the company would collapse. And if you're a fighter, you see this, you see what's happening, and it makes you uneasy. Now, I will say this. I mean, it's a long deal that they have with DAZN. And, Canelo, like it or not, he's stuck, with
Let me ask you about that, Robert. When Canelo
contract.
signed that deal, wasn't Triple G part of that deal? Well, then why would Canelo sign the deal knowing that? If Canelo didn't want to fight him?
See, that's the thing. I think it was more of wasn't in writing. It was more like, wink, wink. I think Canelo signed the deal because it was, so lucrative as far as thing. I know another thing on the deal that Canelo didn't like was that Canelo, got his money for his fights and everything. But as part of the deal, Oscar got a little side deal where they would promote, a bunch of Golden Boy, cards and put money in his pocket. So Canelo's like, I'm doing the fighting. Why is this not for my promotional company?
Right.
Why is it for your promotional company? So I think it's something that the money was so big that maybe all of the fine print, they didn't read and everything. And then once it started coming to light, it's like, hey, wait a minute, I might have been taking advantage of it a little bit. I was just I just saw the press conference where they were announcing the Canelo and Kovalev fight, and Canelo didn't talk to Oscar at all. Very cold to him, not interacting with him at all, not taking any pictures with him. So it's definitely
unbelievable story. All right, let's do our picks on the Spence and the Porter fight. Who do you like in that fight? Give me a quick breakdown.
Yeah, a quick break. I mean, I think it's going to be competitive early. I think Sean's going to be all hyped up and try his best right at the beginning. But every Spence fight that I've ever seen, what ends up happening is somewhere around that 4th, 5th, 6th round, you just get tired of this big guy just keep coming relentless on you. So I don't think, Sean's going to quit or anything, but I do think it's going to be a TKO probably in the 8th or 9th round, either someone throwing in the towel or the ref.
Do you think there's going to be a lot of inside fighting on this situation?
I think if Sean does it relentlessly,
right,
he'll get knocked out faster. I just don't think Spence is just too sharp. I think if Sean's only chance, I think, is to confuse Spence, meaning inside out, aggressive, box, move, try to steal rounds in the last 30 seconds. I told somebody, I said, hey, you got to be Sugar Ray Leonard versus Hagler. He got to move around and then get in there close, throw 20 punches in the last 10 seconds and bail out and hope that the judges just kind of give it to him.
Porter's he's got to pray that he catches Spence at some point in some way, but it's really hard to, especially after the Ugas fight, which Porter essentially lost coming into this fight, which makes to me, I hate to be cynical about it, but I'm not all that excited about this fight in particular after Porter's last performance. But I think this is on my side of it. I think there's going to be a unanimous decision, and Spence is going to win going away. But I mean, Porter has a tendency to lead with his chin, so I think we're going to find out more too about what I found fascinating about the Garcia fight was. Got to give Mikey Garcia a lot of credit. Totally overmatched, took an unbelievable beatdown. But in the back of my mind, it cropped up. Maybe Spence doesn't have the power we thought he had, that he couldn't take out Garcia.
I think Spence is not, he's not a one punch, guy. He's not going to just, one punch is not, he's just overwhelming. If you want to look at it like this, he's like Sean Porter, just with a lot of boxing skills. You know what I mean? He just swarms you with the body punches and everything to the point that you just don't want to take, anymore. I think that's his power. I think it's more of a just overwhelming type of power as opposed to, him just knocking somebody out on one punch or anything. That's why I was like, I don't think anything's going to happen early. I think if the breakdown
last thing for you, we've been talking about best college football game day atmospheres. You're an Ohio State guy, right? So where do you put Ohio State in that category?
I mean, it's right up there. Ohio State to me is a top 5 all time college. I'm a graduate. I'm biased. I'm a Buckeye, but I've been to most of the Big Ten ones. So Penn State's crazy. Michigan's crazy. Wisconsin is crazy. I've done Oregon.
How about
it's
SC?
crazy.
How about
I've been around.
Not crazy. Well, you weren't here during the Carroll era, and I was.
Oh, that's true.
Covering it actually on the USC Network. I did pre-post game show for the USC football broadcast, and when that was going on, it was crazy. But it's still more of a wine and cheese thing. Whereas Ohio State, it's literally a lifestyle. It's built into your. And I worked at Ohio State too on WBNS.
Being in Columbus for those 4.5 years. I mean, Ohio State's bigger than the Bengals. They're bigger than the Browns, in my opinion. When it comes, and like you said, it's the capital, but that's all it is. You can't go 2 blocks without someone, with an Ohio State flag or something like that. So,
Robert, I appreciate the time. Thanks for popping on.
No problem at all. You have a good one. Anytime you need me.
That's great stuff. It's Robert Littal, Black Sports Online, BSO on Twitter, and literally the #1 website and the #1 Twitter feed. I'm on his Twitter feed. Literally, I keep saying the word literally, but for real, right? When I go on Twitter, I mean, there's a few people out there. I don't know about you, but when and I'm in the media because this is kind of my job. I got to know what's going on. But you're going to have your lists on Twitter where you're following certain numbers of people, and you got TweetDeck, and if you don't know about TweetDeck, get that app. Get it for your laptop. All right, your desktop, TweetDeck, because you put in everybody that you're following, and it will update things in real time and waterfall down the page for you. So what I do is I set up separate lists, different sports media, and of course I've got Robert in sports media, my sports media category. Then you got your college football writer category, you got your NFL category, and so when I'm watching an NFL game, I got my TweetDeck up, and you can literally see it's scrolling down the page, pushing in real time through TweetDeck. It's really cool. So Robert's in that category, though. He goes beyond that for me in that when I, let's say I've been out, had lunch, or was working on something and off the grid, and then I come back and I want to know what's going on. The first thing I do behind the curtain is I hit the search for Twitter, see what's trending on Twitter. What's the latest news headlines on Twitter? I found that's the best thing you could do, including forget about ESPN, forget about FS1, forget about everybody. That's what I do. And then the next thing is I'm going to go to particular people beyond the list, beyond just who I'm following, that I'm going to go to their timeline to see what they're posting, right? And I could probably name those accounts on one hand, but 2 of them off the top of my head would be TMZ Sports, Evan Rosenblum, who we're going to have back on this show again soon. We got to think about getting him on here in the next week or two. Evan Rosenblum of TMZ Sports, and Robert Littal, absolutely in that category. the vanguard of sports media and sports celebrity news. He has the number one sports celebrity gossip website on the internet. Forget about, the fact that it's African-American centric to an extent. It is, but it isn't. He covers everything in sports. So that's why I love to have him on. And now, he's out here in Los Angeles covering fights, and he's a credentialed guy all over the country, covering the Super Bowl, you name it. He's done a great job, Robert Littau. Tomorrow, we're going to have Mike Coppinger on. We'll have We're going to cover this fight. And this is a thing that, again, this is kind of a hole in the sports media that we're going to cover. We're going to bring in boxing fans. And eventually, I want to, build a boxing following in an audience. And we had Robert in to discuss it today at length, because boxing's everywhere now. It's on Fox. It's on Big Fox. It's on ESPN. It's going to be in your face in the future. The Wilder Fury thing, Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury, remember those names, because you're going to be seeing them a lot, because you got Fox and you've got ESPN in bed. Tony asked me, by the way, in the comments, we've got Tony asking in the comments, who is the best reporter in boxing? And Tony, in my opinion right now, based on breaking news, it would be Mike Coppinger. And you really can't argue with that. I don't think that there's any reporter out there. Dan Rafael, Kevin Iole, Steve Kim, certainly in that category. But Mike Coppinger is just taken to the next level. He is Adrian Wojnarowski. He is the Adrian Wojnarowski of boxing, the Adam Schefter of boxing, Mike Coppinger. And guess what, Tony? We're going to have him on the show here tomorrow. And so when we talk about Oscar with Robert today, Robert actually has sources as well on this story. We heard some of those reports from Robert today that were sourced. But Mike Coppinger is the man. He's the guy that breaks when fights are going to happen. I believe he's the guy that broke the Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury heavyweight title fight that's coming up. I think he broke that. And he's at the forefront of what's going on with Oscar right now. And I think that could be a story to really, really follow, and it could break big. I'm on record on that, Cam, by the way. Keep your eye on our producer, Cam Smith. Keep your eye on Oscar De La Hoya, because I think something may come down the pike here soon about him. But Mike Coppinger is going to be with us tomorrow, Tony. And Tony also asked me in the comments, will Michael Smith, ESPN on-air personality, used to be on His and Hers, used to be on SC6, I think it was called, with Jamel Hill. Of course, Jamel Hill has left ESPN subsequent to that. And you probably remember that with her interaction with Donald Trump on Twitter, and all hell broke loose, and ESPN reassigned her to the Undefeated and other projects. And now she's gone, and she's at the Atlantic, and she got Jamel Hill has a podcast, I think, on Spotify now, and very, very popular person on Twitter. But Michael Smith did shows with her, and Tony asked me, will Michael Smith ever get another sports media job after Jamel Hill? Well, at ESPN right now, Tony, he is still employed, and he has what people like to refer to, at ESPN at least, he's wearing the golden handcuffs, right? So he's not getting any opportunities, Tony, at ESPN, but he's getting paid. So he's still there. And I think that that's something that may play out perhaps with Michelle Beadle, maybe not. She may get a buyout. Michael Smith, I don't think is going to get a buyout. In other words, I don't think Michael Smith wants to stop getting paid by ESPN throughout the length of his contract. And I've got to go back and look and see how long that contract is. But I know that he wants to get paid. And he's not on projects that I'm aware of. Cam, I don't know if you have seen Michael Smith on air on ESPN. I don't think he has been. But so that's what's happening right now, Tony. And Michael Smith, absolutely, I want you to know, he will absolutely, when his contract is up at ESPN, stops getting paid by Bristol, he will have a job in sports media. And I'd like to think he will instantly. Jamel Hill not working, I think, in sports media right now. I'd be surprised if she didn't get back in. I think she might want to transition into non-sports media at some point. But Michael Smith, I think, will be back in the sports media. There may be this perception. Now we've got Cam Smith checking in. Of course, Jamel Hill with The Atlantic. Thanks for pointing that out, Cam. And then also Michael Smith, I guess, has a weekly ESPN radio show. So we have to go look that up. I want to hear what's on that show. It should be something interesting. It hasn't been reported. Surprising. But some good questions from you guys in the comments. And I'm going to be talking ESPN. Obviously, if you guys in the comments have questions about ESPN, people at the network, Fox Sports, that's part of my expertise. We broke the story about Michelle Beadle no longer being part of NBA Countdown. And of course, that's come to fruition. Chauncey Billups, Paul Pierce, also gone from that show, NBA Countdown. We broke it on Sports by Brooks. And we've broken some stories here in the last week about college football. I just tweeted out today something that if you watch this show every day, you already knew. I mentioned Deion Sanders being behind the hire at Florida State of Willie Taggart, which has turned into a disaster 2 seasons in. Now I'm hearing that prime Deion Sanders, primetime Deion, is calling around, canvassing to see what he can do in terms of extricating Florida State from that awful situation with Willie Taggart. Will Willie turn it around? Perhaps. This may be a situation where Florida State, at the very least, I think, waits it out this year. But this is not a good job. The facilities there are not good. You've got new ACC network money flowing into Tallahassee. But in general, the reputation of Florida State, when it comes to the attractiveness of that job, it's not good at all. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I've elucidated you on some of them, but facilities, number one. ACC network money will help in terms of recruiting, but they've got to upgrade their facilities at Florida State. There's no reason why Florida State can't be there with Clemson at the very top, with the tradition and the recruiting ground that they have. Clearly, though, when you look at Willie Taggart not working, I guess we talked about this with Dana Holgerson earlier in the show. You really do kind of have to give Willie Taggart a little time here, don't you? But what about Jeremy Pruitt? I think Jeremy Pruitt is likely going to have the chute pulled on him at Tennessee. Of course, Tennessee playing Georgia coming up, Mississippi State, Alabama. It would be ludicrous to me if they fired him after those games. They're going to probably lose all 3 of those games, Tennessee. I think the big question is going to be, how does Tennessee play against UAB at home? As outrageous as that sounds, I think that UAB game could be a referendum on the future of Jeremy Pruitt. And I want to reiterate this. I want to point this out again. Peyton Manning has been involved in canvassing for contingency candidates, but Tennessee has a plan in place, and Pete Thamel has reported this. Tennessee has a plan in place where if Jeremy Pruitt does get fired, Philip Fulmer is going to take over as the interim coach for Tennessee this year. Mark it down. And I think there's a good chance it's going to happen. It's funny because we're talking about Willie Taggart. He's in year 2. Pruitt's in year 2, but Pruitt is likely gone. Why is that? That's a conversation for another day. We've already been on with you about 2 hours, had some great guests. Tony Bruno from Philadelphia, phenomenal. Bart Winkler. I thought Bart Winkler was great from Milwaukee. Very funny guy. Now we know why he's on a morning drive in Milwaukee. Ross Dellinger, outstanding job going through that kind of trying to comb through that De'Ara King situation. And there's still a lot of mystery to that. That's going to be an interesting story. I think, especially in the context of a top program trying to maybe get him away from Houston. Is that going to happen? What's going on with Dana Holgerson? I'm not high on Dana Holgerson. The whole plan, I want you to know at the University of Houston, if you don't know this already, is to get to the Big 12. Of course, Houston, once upon a time, part of the Southwest Conference. Now the goal is get to the Big 12, right? And Dana Holgerson is part of that process, brought in by billionaire Fertitta, also the owner of the Rockets, right? So that's the master plan. They're 1-3. And Holgerson's thinking about himself. He's not thinking about the seniors this year. He's thinking about himself, the program, but himself. in asking Derek King not to leave. Will he leave? That could be very damaging, I think, to the reputation of Dana Holgerson in general with the media and also with recruiting. So this could be a watershed moment for Holgerson in the very early stages of his career. And don't forget, he left West Virginia in tatters, basically mailed in recruiting his last year at West Virginia. That's been documented in the press. Not a good look for Dana Holgerson. So we'll see what develops. You would think Houston, a match made in heaven for him, but the early returns, not good. I know he lost close games, as Ross pointed out. We'll have to wait and see. But the AAC, very competitive, and there's no reason why Houston can't be at the very top. You talk about recruiting ground. You talk about as good as it gets in the country. The Houston area, South Texas, where he is. Louisiana's in that mix too. It doesn't get any better in this country when it comes to recruiting than exactly where Dana Holgerson is. And there's absolutely no reason why that team shouldn't be winning 10, if not 11 games every year. The start of the Cougars is unacceptable if I'm a trustee, a donor, or a fan of the University of Houston. And now this embarrassment about your starting quarterback wants to leave. You ask him to stay. His father wants him to leave. It's a mess. It's a tell, I think, is what is going to continue to happen under Dana Holgerson at Houston. And then, of course, you had Robert Littell on, and I went on and on about him because he does a great job. So coming up tomorrow, Mike Coppinger is going to join us. We're also going to be joined by Chris Myers of Fox Sports. He's going to be covering the NFL, of course. That's what he does on Sundays. But he'll be covering the fight on Saturday for Fox. It's going to be on Big Fox, Spencer Porter. So we're going to talk boxing and we're going to talk NFL with Chris Myers, who will be at the Rams facility tomorrow when we speak with him. And we also hope to touch base with Matt Jones of Kentucky Sports Radio. If you know anything about sports blogging, Twitter, radio in general, you've heard the name Matt Jones. And I think he's running for office, Cam. I think you probably heard about this, but Matt Jones is a legend in the state of Kentucky. He's got the biggest radio show in Kentucky. Great guy. He's on ESPN radio and once a week. He does, actually, I think he does weekends. Tremendous guy on the air. You're really going to enjoy Matt Jones. Hopefully we're going to have him. I think we will tomorrow, and other special guests, as we always have. Every single day. You see it now. We're doing it every day, Monday through Friday, weekdays, noon Eastern time. And so for my producer, Cam Smith in Boston, this is Brooks Melchior saying so long from Los Angeles. And this has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.